I took the biggest hit of my life from two people. The man I loved for years and the friend I called like a sister for a decade. For 2 years, they were writing a second story under the same roof while I was still stuck on page one. The day I learned the truth, the keys were in my hand, but the house was no longer mine. So what did I do, and who did I cut out of my life? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. They both told me they loved me, one as a partner, the other as a sister by choice. I believed them so completely that I built a life on top of their words. A mortgage, a set of keys, holiday plans booked months ahead. If I tell you the secret that lived inside my house for 2 years, promise you won't look away, because I didn't either. I stared straight at it and somehow still missed it. By the time I finally understood, my name was still on the loan, but the home wasn't mine anymore. What I did next will either sound like weakness or survival, depending on what you've had to carry. We were together 5 years. Before he became my boyfriend, A and I were best friends for 3. We were good at being ordinary together. Groceries, weekend coffee, passing each other headphones to share a song. Elle had been in my life even longer, 10 years of shared apartments, shared dresses, shared Uber rides home from bad dates. I thought love was a simple math problem. Multiply time by trust and you get permanence. If stories like this make you feel less alone, you can subscribe and say, "This is where I stop pretending and tell you what really happened." The plan was always a future. We toured houses while debating paint colors the way other people debate politics. I had 2 kids from a previous relationship, and I tried to be the adult in the room, steady, neutral kind. When we closed on a little place with too many trees and not enough closet space, it felt like a promise sealed in paper. Elle helped us move. She labeled boxes, brought snacks, slid a note into my palm that said, "Proud of you." It felt like a blessing. I remember the first hairline crack, though at the time I named it something else. And Elle had started trading jokes I didn't get, little in-jokes that sounded like souvenirs from a trip I hadn't taken. Nothing explicit, just a rhythm that didn't need me to keep the beat. He called her when the sink leaked because she lives closer to the hardware store. She sent me playlists for stress, but the caption spoke to him. I told myself this is how adults do friendship lattice work, not triangles. I told myself closeness is generosity, not a currency to hoard. On Thursday night, that could have been any Thursday, I walked in with takeout and heard laughter rise from the living room. A's voice and Al's voice dancing around each other like they had rehearsed. The window was open, the curtains breathing in and out. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was wrong. It became a mantra. I used to fold laundry and set out wine glasses. If I said it often enough, it might stay true. We fought more, but not about her. We fought about dishes and schedules and who was emotionally unavailable at 11:30. P.M. Friction became our only proof that the engine still worked. When I withdrew, I imagined work stress, co-parenting stress. We're just in a busy season. When I withdrew, I called it self-preservation. It's astonishing how many names you can invent for the same ache. I used to think betrayal announces itself like thunder. What I've learned is that it prefers lamplight to lightning. It arrives quietly in soft tones and tidy explanations. It wears your friends' faces. It burrows your vocabulary. And it waits. The night our relationship ended wasn't dramatic. It was 2 people on opposite ends of a couch admitting that what used to feel inevitable now felt optional. We said we needed space. He said he didn't want to hurt me. I said I wanted the truth, and then looked away when it didn't come. I packed an overnight bag that turned into a week that turned into a sublet. We remained adult, which is to say we did the paperwork. Here is the first cliff I nearly missed. A week after I left, a mutual friend texted me a screenshot meant for someone else. It was a joke about finally doing what we should have done 2 years ago, followed by a photo of a dinner table. I recognized the chipped plate we kept meaning to replace, the salt grinder we stole from a restaurant by accident, and then kept because it made us laugh. The table lived in my kitchen. My name was still on the mortgage. My chest felt hollow, as if my ribs had become a birdcage with no bird. I called Elle. I wanted her voice to be a rope I could climb back to safety. She told me I was imagining things. She told me people gossip when they don't know what else to do. She told me love makes everyone a little strange. I could hear the almost in her answers, the way a door almost closes before it clicks. I asked her outright. She said no, and my stomach broke its fall on that single word. Days later, because the universe is uncreative with timing, I got the rest. Another friend, tired of holding someone else's secret, handed me proof measured in calendar entries and ride receipts and restaurant reservations. None of it was indecent. All of it was damning. They had been orbiting each other for 2 years inside my life. It wasn't a fling. It was a second storyline written under mine. In finer pen dot, I moved out of the house properly after that. Not because I had a choice, I didn't, but because staying was like sleeping under a ceiling that had already fallen. I refused to sell. He said the kids needed stability, that courts were slow, that we could work something out. He used the word we as though it still included me. The realtor's card curled on my fridge until I threw it out. I started over from nothing, which is another way to say I started with myself. The worst part wasn't the cheating. The worst part was how ordinary it managed to be, how it dressed in the clothes of care we wanted to protect you. We didn't want to hurt you. It was complicated. The worst part was realizing that while I was busy keeping the lights on, 2 people I loved had been building a parallel room inside my house where I never stood. I confronted Al one last time. She looked me in the eye and insisted nothing happened until after the breakup, which technically made her innocent. Technically, I wanted to scream is not the same as true. Grief is not just crying. Sometimes it's changing your email address because your old one knows too many anniversaries. Sometimes it's seeing a picture of your living room and feeling seasick. Sometimes it's calling your mother and telling her you are fine because you can hear her heart breaking across the state line. I threw myself into work until work became a raft. I changed careers and discovered a version of competence that didn't require permission. I learned how to enjoy Sunday mornings again, and yet there's a particular emptiness that comes when you lose the person who would have been your emergency contact and the friend who would have brought you soup the next day. The group chat that once felt like a porch light became a room where I no longer belonged. Some people handled it by splitting the difference birthday, wishes to me, housewarming gifts to them. Some people went quiet, which is its own kind of decision. I stopped checking who liked whose photos. It felt like quitting a habit. Here's the second edge I stood on. One afternoon, Elle messaged me to apologize for how everything looked, not for what it was, how it looked. She wrote that she hoped I could see time had healed things. She asked if we could meet for coffee like old times. I stared at my phone until the battery died. I wanted to ask her whether the last decade meant less to her than the last 2 years. I wanted to ask if she remembered sleeping on my couch after the surgery, the night I held her hair, the week I helped her move, the year we scraped rent together. I wanted to ask if betrayal feels different when it's dressed as convenience. I didn't meet her. I couldn't make my face learn the shape of that new smile. People ask how you didn't know. I did know, in the way a house knows where it creaks at night. I knew in the way I hesitated before hanging my coat, in the way I took longer routes home without admitting why. I knew enough to feel unsteady and not enough to act with certainty. There's a word for this cognitive dissonance, but that's a clinical phrase for something messy and human. Loving 2 people so much that you'd rather be wrong than alone. If you are listening to this because you've been there, I want to tell you something I wish someone had said to me sooner. Losing your place in a story you thought you were writing isn't proof that you were naive. Sometimes it means you were still telling the truth while other people stopped. It's not a moral failing to believe your friend when she says no. It's not foolish to give grace to a person you share a house with. It's not weak to pick your heart up from a kitchen floor and decide to take it somewhere safer. I was angry at the house for a long time, as if drywall could choose sides. I wanted to scorch the blueprints, unsalt the soil, and declare that nothing beautiful had ever lived there. But the truth is more complicated. Some beautiful things did. I made soup on rainy nights, and we danced to stupid songs, and we argued about nothing, because we were privileged to have nothing to argue about. The existence of joy doesn't pardon harm. The presence of harm doesn't erase joy. I'm allowed to remember both. I refused to sell, and I hired an attorney who taught me a new language: equity, partition, timelines. We had a whole conversation about reasonable accommodations. For children, a phrase that made me feel both kind and invisible at once. Reasonable accommodation. I kept hearing those words until they sounded like furniture being dragged across a floor. I decided to conserve my energy. That choice will disappoint some people who want revenge to be cinematic. Survival for me looked like letting go of an address so I could hold on to myself. I wish I could say I never think about them. I do. I picture Al placing my plant in a different corner and A explaining why that corner gets better light. I picture them standing in the doorway of the kitchen where we used to stand and deciding whether the chipped plate is still funny. Occasionally, a bitter thought arrives. I paid the first half of that story. Then I remember what I bought with the ending: sleep that doesn't flinch, mornings that don't brace. There's a cost to staying angry. I'm budgeting differently now. People ask if I'll ever be friends with her again. Friendship is a contract you sign with your actions, not your mouth. Mine was revoked the day I learned the timeline wasn't a misunderstanding, but a map. People ask if I'll ever forgive him. Forgiveness is a word that sounds like a door you open for the other person, but sometimes it's a window you crack for yourself so the air can change. I am not there yet. I am not required to be there on anyone else's schedule. This is where the advice should go. The tidy moral printed on the last page. I don't have one. What I have is a handful of small, boring truths that saved me. Tell the whole story to someone who can hold it without trying to edit it. Stop rehearsing the perfect speech you'll deliver to the people who hurt you. They may never learn a language you understand. Make your bed. Eat something warm. If you have to start over at a wobbly table in a two-bed apartment, light a candle and bless it anyway. If I could speak to the version of myself who thought trust plus time equals permanence, I'd tell her the equation needs another variable: choices. Not just there's yours. Choose standards that aren't negotiable. Choose to believe yourself when your body says something is off. Choose to step away from the ledger book where you're forced to prove your worth across columns that were never balanced. Choose your peace like the bills due tonight. Now I want to hear from you, because stories like these are only bearable when we stop carrying them alone. Would you tell your former friend group the full truth, or let them remake their own minds? Would you push a legal fight over the house for the principle of it, or protect your energy for the rest of your life? Would you choose forgiveness if it meant you could sleep, or hold the line if it meant you could look yourself in the eye? If you think I'm right to forgive myself for missing the red flags and choosing healing over spectacle, tap like. If you don't, tell me why. I read every comment, even the ones that hurt a little, because I'm practicing being honest in public. I don't pretend I'm unscathed. I am, however, unbroken. I have a new job I like and a list of recipes I'm learning to cook, and I've started saying yes to plans I used to cancel. On Sundays, I walk past a row of houses and feel a softness that isn't envy. Windows glow the same way they did in my old neighborhood. I don't imagine the rooms behind them anymore. I just hope the people inside know what they have. If you stayed this long, thank you. I'm not here to make villains and saints. I'm here to tell the truth without stripping it for parts. I lost a home and a history and two people I thought were permanent. In return, I found an unglamorous kind of freedom. I decide what I will not accept. I decide what love must mean. I decide who gets a key